Hello coders and welcome to another episode of Learn to Code Fundamentals. In this video, we will cover variables in the context of writing code. As with the other videos in the series, the code that appears will be in C#, but the basic ideas translate to any other programming language. Let's first answer the question, what is a variable? The most basic answer to this is that a variable is a name that we can give to a value so that we can refer to it later. Those familiar with algebra will likely already be familiar with variables in a math context, but there are some key differences we should highlight. Take this equation for example. In this case, there's one variable x. It's a pretty common school exercise to solve this equation for x. In math, variables are names that we can use to refer to values that we don't currently know. We don't actually know what value of x would make this statement true, but we can still refer to the unknown value because we named it x. Moving the numbers in that equation around eventually gets you to the value of x. We can see that the variable named x has a value of 3. It is important to note that in math, the equal sign means that both sides of the equation are the same value. While the symbols in programming might look pretty similar to the math case, the major difference is that we as programmers are generally the ones to determine the values of our variables. This line of code here is telling the program that we have a variable named x. As opposed to the math case, the equal sign in programming means that we are assigning a value. We want the variable x to be set to the value of 3. Once again, assigning to x the value of 3 versus finding that x must be 3 to make the equation true. Another obvious difference is this blue int word. In C# and other strongly typed languages, you must in general declare what kind of data the variable will hold, or in other words, the variable's type. Types will be covered in more detail in a later video. For now, we can get by just knowing the int or integer type. Of course, you aren't limited to naming your variables single letters. Variables represent bits of data that are important to how your program will function, so it is very important to give them names that reflect what that data means. I want to take a moment to emphasize that point. As you are beginning your coding career or continuing onwards, know that naming is one of the biggest factors of writing good, maintainable code. Many a bug has been caused or stretched out way longer than necessary by values being named wrong or misleading things. A declaration is telling your program that you want to create a space for a value and give it a name. In the C# language and many others, the minimum to declare a variable is telling the program what kind of data the variable will be, as well as what you want to call it. You don't technically have to assign a value to the variable to declare it. Here, we are saying we want to declare a variable x, which will hold an integer. Once you've declared a variable in your program, you can assign values to it further down in the program's flow so long as it remains in scope. Scope will be covered in more detail in another video. Note that once a variable is declared, assigning a value to it later does not require the type to be specified. In fact, trying to do so will give you an error as the program will assume you are trying to redeclare the variable. Of course, as we have seen earlier, we can declare a variable and assign it in the same statement. This is usually how you'll see it. Additionally, just like in math, variables can have other variables in their definition. Of course, in the programming context, y and z would have been assigned variables in an earlier part of the program. You can assign anything to a variable as long as that anything is of the right type. This includes the values returned by functions, which we will cover in more detail in a future video. You can also assign values to variables multiple times in a program. The variable will retain the last assigned value. Ultimately, we declare and assign values to use them to make our programs more useful. Even if we only have declarations and assignments under our belts, variables are still very useful to us because they can make our code more expressive. What do I mean by more expressive? Consider this code and the output below it. The program definitely runs, but it is hard to tell what the output is supposed to mean. Instead of just using raw numbers, we can assign those numbers to some variables. Then, those variables are allowed to be used anywhere a raw value of that same type could have been used. When we add in some well-named variable declarations and assignments, the functionality of the code doesn't change at all, but now it becomes much more apparent what we meant when we wrote the code. I hope I'm one of the 4. In this lesson, the key takeaways are that variables allow us to give names to values. These names can help us communicate what our code is trying to do. We can assign values to our variables multiple times once we have declared them, and they will retain their last assigned values. Lastly, we can use variables anywhere that raw values of the same type could have been used in our code. Thanks for watching this Learn to Code Fundamentals video. If you like this content, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing for future content. See you next time, and happy coding!